Hey everybody, Hugh Sweeney back here tonight with another video about cameras. During the week I heard the news that the brand new Canon 90D was to be released. I think on the 28th of this month, which is only a couple of days away, alongside the M6 camera, which I know less about and I'm not going to talk about. So the 90D is here and there's some pretty cool improvements. Canon have done what they kind of very often do and not done too much tweaking, not too much changing. It has the similar body shape to the 80D. It hasn't changed that much. There are some new little differences. I do see a joystick on the back there, which is very much welcomed. But there's some nice little subtle changes in here with the 90D, which I think is pretty awesome. And tonight in this video, I'm going to share with you some of the reasons why I think this could be a really good camera for certain things. So I've been a big fan of the Canon cameras for years. I've owned 3 of them. I've gone from the 60D to the 80D and then to this one right here, which is the EosR. Now, Canon have always been sort of a big player in the photography game, and with video in recent years, they sort of got left a little bit behind. And some of the cameras like the GH5 and stuff were streets ahead on specs. Even though my 80D was primarily a photography camera, I found myself using it for video because the quality was actually kind of nice. There was something about the 80D that I liked, and its autofocus was just stellar. Lots of YouTubers have been using Canon cameras because the autofocus is just so reliable and the image is lovely. Even Matty from Travel Fields, Potato Jet, lots of these guys, Peter McKinnon of course using the 1DX, and they just like Canon cameras. Even though the Canon cameras don't have in-body image stabilization, but the fact that they have flip screens and do autofocus brilliantly and have lovely color science just sort of attracts people to them. So if you're a YouTuber and if you're a person to camera videographer where you use a camera on a tripod a lot and you want really good autofocus like that eases in. I've probably set that a little bit fast. I don't think you're going to beat Canon cameras, and I think that the 90D is going to be stellar in this field. When I left from my 80D to shoot with this guy, the Canon EosR for bird photography, I found that it was actually a bit of a disappointment because of the mirrorless system. It cannot update the system as quick as a DSLR camera, where the mirror is literally just going really fast like that. It's taking several photos and you're seeing the actual animal or the sports person or whatever you're seeing them live through the lens. It's not processing it through a viewfinder, and I think that is one really good thing about having a DSLR. Great wildlife camera, 10 shots per second burst mode in tracking focus. That is awesome. Really good for wildlife, really good for sports. You have the crop sensor as well, another big reason that it's going to be good for wildlife and good for sports. You're going to lose a little bit of depth of field there by having the crop sensor, but it's going to be great for lenses like this guy right here, this 70 to 200. It's going to be, it's going to go right up to like a 300 more, or even more like a 320. So it's going to be a perfect range lens on a sports field, and even for wildlife you're going to get away with that. The bigger lens that I have is the 600mm. It's the 150 to 600mm budget zoom lens from Sigma, and that coupled with the 32 megapixel sensor on the 90D is going to be really good. You're going to get an awful lot more detail in bird shots than you will with this Canon EosR right here. It'll probably have good battery life because the 80D had great battery life. You could take a hell of a lot of photos on one of those LP6 batteries. So it probably has the same, if not better, battery life, and that's a good thing. Probably one of the reasons the 80D was very successful and the 90D will be just as successful probably is because of the price range. It's sort of marketed as a more budget camera, and it's going to come in way cheaper than a lot of other cameras. The likes of the S1 here is way more expensive. It's almost twice as expensive, and the EosR is literally twice as expensive as what this is probably going to be. I think it's going to be about 1,400 euros in Europe and about $1,200 to $1,400 in America. I'm not too sure. it's got a I think it's Digic 8 processor. I haven't a clue what that means. I assume it's newer technology in the processor, and it will probably be a good upgrade from the 80D. So now that we looked at some of the advantages of the 90D, let's look at some of the things that I don't like about the 90D. Firstly, the body being a little bit old school. You know, the body doesn't look that much cooler than the 80D. The EosR was an awesome design. I would have liked to see Canon redesign the body a little bit, sort of bring it up to date. I think there's nothing wrong with what they have, but it does look to be a very similar style to the 80D, which is like 3.5 years old. So I wish Canon sort of redesigned it from the ground up, made it a little bit more techie, a little bit more modern, bearing in mind that I think they have discontinued the 7D. So if they've discontinued the 7D and are amalgamating it with the 80D, which is now the 90D, maybe they should have called it something else. Maybe they should have just got rid of the 80D, 90D thing and 70 and just come up with, you know, the EOS DC or something. I don't know. Call it something new, and had a redesign on the body shape, a little bit different to the 80D, but keeping all the goodness in there as well. So that's one thing I just not crazy about, is similar design. Would have liked to see something a bit more modern. When you get used to a digital viewfinder, it is a bit of a change from a digital viewfinder to an optical viewfinder. There are benefits of the optical viewfinder when it comes to DSLRs and speed when tracking subjects, such as birds flying through the sky. But then again, a digital viewfinder, when you look through it, it's way bigger. The optical viewfinder is so small to look at through the eyepiece. You're going to have a lot of black area around it. You're going to be looking at a much smaller square. Plus, of course, it doesn't digitally adjust the brightness to suit, meaning that if you're shooting something in the dark, it's very hard to focus and it's very hard to see what you're shooting. Whereas with the digital viewfinder, it'll give you that sort of false boosted brightness through ISO or whatever. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit, that's a bit of a negative, so that one. Another possible negative with this camera is the fact that there's a good chance that it's not going to give HDMI out. The 80D didn't give you HDMI out, it didn't give you a clean signal, so Canon may not do it with the 90D. If they do, they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot a little bit, and people will be very disinterested in the EosR. If it does, and you can record ProRes in 4K, this camera is going to be a no-brainer. Another possible negative, I'm not sure, is the actual dynamic range. There wasn't great dynamic range in video with the 80D. Maybe it's better with the new processor, we don't know yet. They haven't leaked any specs on the dynamic range of the camera. Also, will the camera shoot C-Log like the Canon EosR? So I'm recording this video here with the Atomos Ninja Shogun, which is attached to the top of the camera. It's on a slider too, by the way. And it shoots ProRes. It lets you record ProRes and you're not compressing the video as much. And it's good for those more high-end video jobs, and you can get a good big screen as well and look at what you're doing. So another negative with the 90D is if you're coming from full frame and you're going back to an APS-C sensor, it is a much smaller sensor. So you are going to lose a lot of your depth of field that you would have with a full frame. It comes with its benefits, as I mentioned earlier on, but you're not going to get that huge shallow depth of field. Now I'm shooting this today. If you look, if I go right in here, this is only 24mm, right? And look at that depth of field behind me. That's because it's shot full frame, full sensor on the EosR. Now if I was to shoot that in 4K, this video in 4K, we would have a crop on the EosR and you wouldn't get the same depth of field for various reasons. So you're not going to have as much depth of field with the APS-C. But as I said, with image resolution and zooming in on things for wildlife and sports, it's going to be a bonus. Ideally, if you had two cameras, if you had this and like the likes of the EosR, you're really spoiled for choice then, I think. I assume this camera is going to have one card slot. If the EosR only has one card slot and it's a SD card, I doubt that the 90D is going to have two card slots. I mean, they're not going to have a higher spec than this camera. So it's probably going to have one SD card slot, and XQD cards are really nice. The S1 has XQD cards and an SD card slot in there. and I would actually prefer if this just had 2 XQD slots, because once you use XQD, there's something about going back to SD, it's not as nice, it's not as robust a card. So that could be another negative to the 90D. So the lack of stabilization is a bit of an issue. Some people say, oh, you can get lenses with stabilization and it's just as good, but it's not really. Lenses that stabilize the image sort of very often introduce little flicks and little sort of funny characteristics that you can't really use in your video. You will also, with in-body stabilization with certain cameras, even on the S1, you'll notice sometimes if you push it too much, you're going to introduce that obvious sort of elastic stabilization, which you want to avoid. But I think the lack of in-body stabilization in the 90D is a negative. They're hardly going to include it. There's no way they're going to include it. They would be in the video if they were. But it could be a negative, but also, I mean, what do you expect? It's a cheaper camera. Will the 90D crop the image in 4K like the Canon EosR? If it does do that, it's going to be heavily cropped, because the sensor has the sensor's quite large. It'll mean it'll crop in. It'll probably be like a 1.7x crop, or 1.8 even, if it has to do that. So you're going to be almost up on a 3x crop if you actually shoot in 4K. That's if it crops it, but hopefully it won't. So that is it. I'm looking forward to this camera coming out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up if you can. That gets the video a little bit more interaction. The more you give it, the more it sort of, you know, hits the YouTube algorithm, and that would be greatly appreciated. And for myself, Hugh Sweeney, this time it's over and out from me. Goodbye now. Take care.